Welcome to the panel room. Today we'll be discussing steampunk, but before we get started, let's go ahead and go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves. And we'll start with you, Leana.
Hello, I am Leana Renee Hieber, and I write Gothic gas lamp fantasy. So it's in the generous umbrella, a parasol, if you will, of steampunk. Gas lamp fantasy is set in the gaslit era of the 19th century, but with fantasy elements rather than science fiction elements. So I really like, one of the things I love about steampunk is it really is about reinvention and about reclaiming narratives, and also about a lot of genre blending. So my latest work is very cross-genre. It's the Spectral City series, and it is about ghost detectives in 1899 Manhattan as they solve corporeal and incorporeal crimes. And the last of this trilogy just came out this last fall, Summoning of Souls. I'm going to be continuing the series in novellas with Bryant Street Publishing. They're the division of Scribed. So if you have a Scribed subscription, you can catch my new works that I'll be doing. I'll be doing 10 novellas with them over the course of the next year and a half. So I'm excited to continue the Spectral City series there and also do some more genre blending with additional novellas there. And I'm excited to talk about all things steampunk and related. And I'm really glad to see some wonderful familiar faces here that I love very much. So,
all right, perfect. Larry.
Hi, everyone. I'm Larry Martin, author and oftentimes co-author with Gail Z. Martin. Under my own name, I have both space opera science fiction and portal fantasy. And then with Gail, we have a number of series, including steampunk and urban fantasy and paranormal and Monster Hunter.
Okay, perfect. Tamsin.
Hi, I'm Tamsin Silver, and I'm an author with Falstaff Books. I write primarily urban fantasy, but recently I've gotten into what would probably be called historical fantasy, but that's the one that starts leaning into steampunk in that time period from 1878, and then especially the next series, which will be in London during Jack the Ripper time. So that falls definitely into that time period. And I'm starting research on that now and building the world out from what's already out right now. The Cursibly the Kid is the main first book that's out, followed by the Torment of Richard Brewer, and the Murder of Cricket Kugler should be coming out in time for Dragontown this year.
All right, perfect. Jean Marie.
Hi, my name is Jean Marie Ward. I write fiction, nonfiction, and everything in between. In the fiction category that crosses into steampunk and a lot of other things that are kind of historical, I have a short story in Cowboys versus Aliens from Zombies Need Brains, the Clockwork Universe. And that basically kicked off what is my steampunk / gaslight / Weird West series called The Wizard of Woodrow Park. And then from there into Gaslight and Grim, which is an anthology that's available from eSpec Books, a steampunk take on fairy tales, which of course I decided to reinvent. Talk about reinvention, Leana. I decided to reinvent the Nightingale, because I just get really sick of Anderson, the way he treats women, let's just say. But that same world also goes into the West, and the very weird West. And there's a novella that is sitting on John Harkness's desk waiting to be published called, oh God, brain dead. But, oh yes, Siren Bridge. It's infamous on many levels. And that novella is Maverick with magic in skirts.
Sexy title.
I'm loving it. I'm digging that.
Just saying.
And finally, Nikki.
Hey, I'm Nikki Woolfolk. I am an author and a chocolatier. So a lot of my work, even with nonfiction, I'll write about the agricultural aspects, the cultural aspects, the diversity, the impact about chocolate, as well as I make it and I sell it. I have an online shop in which I ship chocolate to as many places as I can. Let's see. I write cozy culinary mysteries. I write culinary steampunk mysteries. Usually, even when I'm writing contemporary, somebody's related to food somehow. So don't read if you're hungry. And if you don't like books with food, I'm not your person. Just know I will make sure to fatten you up in whatever way is humanly possible. And more butter equals love. So,
True.
so I have a few books out. Usually when it comes to cozy mysteries, people that love to read them, including myself, we love play on words. So with my background in the culinary world, I have Maison Death, which is a play on Maison Place, of my bittersweet mystery series. And that's with my steampunk chocolatier, Alex LeBeau. She is a chocolatier. She is a chef instructor at a cooking school. And she and her girlfriend, Josephine, run around solving mysteries and murders. So think of it as if Lucy and Ethel were a lesbian couple in the steampunk era, what would they do? So it's been a joy writing in this steampunk world where I made sure that this world has been created with what happens if the Civil War did not happen? What happens when Black and brown and women and, you know, everybody's considered a minority is actually the majority in this world? What would happen with our science, and how much more would we be able to create without that, you know, that pesky racism in the way? So it's been amazing to write novellas, rom-coms within this world. So that's what I do.
All right, perfect. So jumping into it, steampunk has a huge connection, it seems, to, of course, the Victorian era. And in many cases, Victorian London timeframe, the timeframe and location. So I'll start with you, Larry. Is that a prerequisite for steampunk, or can it take place in other locations?
I definitely think it can take place in other locations. As a matter of fact, when we did our contract for our steampunk novel, Iron and Blood, that was one of the requirements. They didn't want it to be in London. So it actually, in the opening scenes, it's London before they go home. So ours is actually set in an alternative history, Pittsburgh, but I'd also do a call out to the Griffiths work, which is a whole different post-apocalyptic world where they've set steampunk. So I think you can really set it anywhere. It doesn't have to be in a particular time frame. I think you'd have to go into the discussion of what makes steampunk versus when. And I'm not sure that the when is the only variable. And I think you can change a number of them. I think steampunk is steam. Everything else you can swap out.
All right. Tamsin, your thoughts?
Yeah, obviously, I think it can take place anywhere. Mine's in New Mexico. So in 1878 during Billy the Kid. So I don't so much have as much steam items. That's why I originally was like, do I qualify for this panel? But there is a lot of magic. There is a lot of invention that is been created through magic versus through other ways. So, but there will be more, we'll probably see more and more of that as we delve more into the world in the next section of books. But I don't think it has to be in London. The next three that I'm doing will take place, one in Texas, one will be in Chicago, and will be in London, and they're all going to be around that time period. So, and as they chase a serial killer who they think is all the same man. So, so yeah, so it's going to be, so I think it can be, I think it's more, is it the essence? Is it the soul of it? Steampunk versus the location. Book 2 will be definitely, and there'll be a lot in London for me, so it'll lean a little more towards the usual, but I don't think it needs to always be there.
All right, so we've got Larry saying it's mainly the steam. You've got Tamsin agreeing with it? Jean Marie?
Well, I think that steampunk basically is a callback originally to Jules Verne, but done primarily by English and American authors who wanted to reinvent the Victorian era, which I can totally understand, because when you look at that era, it's so tactile. It's there, everything has a touch, a smell. It's not smooth surfaces. If it's smooth surfaces, it's getting soot on it. Or, you know, and the street smell of horse manure, because that's what was there. But you got all these clockworks and these gears, and it's fascinating. And of course, when people thought of Victoriana, they thought of London and to a lesser extent, Paris. But just because a genre starts that way doesn't mean that's where it has to end up. And let's face it, I'd be really hesitant to set something in England because I'd never get the damned cast right. I mean, the classes, the interaction between the classes, the way that they refer to the members of their aristocracy. Oh, a duke is a duke is a duke, but you'd better call him Your Grace. And that's the easy one, all right? So I'd never get that straight. But the same forces were at work in a place I know a heck of a lot better, the United States. And I've lived in a lot of places in this country. And as you know, Larry and Gail have done Pittsburgh, and Leana does New York, and yeah, you're doing Louisiana, and Nikki and Tamsin's doing the Wild West. I mean, there are a lot of different places. Like the first story I mentioned, that takes place in an alternate New Jersey. I mean, Thomas Edison, hello. That's the essence of steampunk. The battles that he had with Nikolai Tesla, that is a steampunk novel waiting to happen, because it is a conflict of titans. And yes, Edison won, but Edison won in life, but Tesla won history. So you've got all of these things. So to limit it to one area is basically to deny the creativity and to deny the world that we all live in, which is a heck of a lot bigger than Paris or London.
Perfect. Nikki, any additional thoughts?
Oh, goodness. I've been questioned when I decided that I didn't want to go with being across the pond. It was on purpose. It's like, yes, I can do my research. Yes, I can definitely, talk about different areas that are not my own. But I really wanted to, I wouldn't say set the world on fire, but I kind of wanted to set the steampunk world aflame and change the tone, because I was finding that besides some of my peers, I was finding a lot of the steampunk writing was the same cast of characters, and there was no diversity. And that rings odd to me, because it's like, we have our history books that are written by the victors, and we understand that. So that's an unfortunate thing. But when it comes to America, and it comes to these inventions, and it comes to all these different aspects, and also knowing my own family's history, including a lot of my great aunts were ranchers and had their own land, like all these different things, and hearing these stories and knowing these stories of my family, and seeing that they're not represented at all, not only in written history, but also within science fiction. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense. As I know for a fact, there are all these different families. So I wanted to write about, these different aspects of people of color, like just so diverse, but I couldn't tell, I didn't want to do, was it Mary Sue? I didn't want to do it all with one person. So I had to split up the way that I told my story. So yes, the difference of my steampunk is within the United States. The difference between it, in order to make sure that this world was, just brimming with inventions, because I love writing about science. It's part of my education, my background. I decided, based on a idea that I had at the age of 11, I remember distinctly remembering thinking, what would have happened to us psychologically? What would have happened to Black folks psychologically if the Civil War had not happened? If racism had not been embraced, if the Klan had not happened, what would have happened with everyone? We would have had even more men, we would have had women, we would have had all these different people. It's still a mix though, because, you know, coming up on that, but what would have happened to our society as science as a whole? And so from there, then, you know, deciding to go three-pronged. So I end up making triplets because I love doing that, because it's a quirky thing that I have. But in those triplets, telling three different aspects of the steampunk world. So with my rom-com, there's, you know, that aspect and that mystery with Alex LeBeau. She's more on the ground, you know, looking at society and seeing how this bridges, you know, the Americas. With her sister, Ava Marchand, she is the ring mistress of the Wicked Night Carnival. She is part of the espionage. So she talks about more of the political aspects. And then there's, you know, the quirky sister, the botanist, who is pretty much, for me, she'll be coming soon with her series. And she's the embodiment of what we remember with Wild Wild West, the old TV series. So I wanted to write it from that perspective. But, you know, so one is Alias on horseback, you know, one is, you know, the cooking school, like deep in the heart of the South. And then you've got the botanist sister that's having these weird adventures, very Jules Verne, very, you know, H.G. Wells, that aspect. So yeah, I like the idea that steampunk can take place any place, anywhere. And also, we have a lot of dukes, you know, we do that with out across the pond, but I'm like, well, what happens if we just have average person having these adventures? So yeah.
All right, Leana, about your New York ones.
My New Year, yeah, you know, it's funny. My first series was set in London because I wanted to deal with the Jack the Ripper murders, and I wanted to give a supernatural explanation to them, a la Greek mythology. So I had gone to London on a school scholarship, and so I'd spent a bunch of time studying there, and so wove that story around ghosts of London and some you know, call outs to Greek mythology, a little bit more really much more fantasy elements. And then someone sort of later said, oh, this would fit with steampunk. And I thought, what is this? I've been this my whole life. I've been anachronistic my whole life. A lot of steampunks are like, well, I've been steampunk before any of us knew it was a term. It's, you know, it's where folks who are interested in history, but not as reenactors, not as trying to take history with its flaws with us here. No, we're interested in reinventing. We're interested in whose stories didn't get told. And, you know, much like Nikki talked about, you know, the ideas of how much history was just, you know, as written by the victors, it doesn't mean the other histories weren't happening. It doesn't mean the people who weren't in power weren't creating stories and legacies of their own. And that's been really fun for me to examine in my current series, which is very much a Gilded Age tale, but it's all working class. I'm really interested in working class New York because it was moving and shaking and changing the world. And, you know, so much of steampunk does get defined by Queen Victoria because that's kind of like, you know, she was a huge trendsetter for her time and she influenced the entire world and the empire and all the blood and bloodshed and conquest that came with that. So as an influential figure, I think you have to sort of acknowledge that Queen Victoria and the empire is a part of what steampunk is dealing with in a setting in terms of a global setting. But I think you find there's a lot more steampunk really that's being written outside, you know, all over the place. A wonderful resource for this is Diana Foe runs a great site called Beyond Victoriana, which is all about, it's all about steampunk around the world. And there's so many different ways about taking technology and history and how do you change what changes in alternate history when you shift how technology has changed the world. So I think really going back to what Larry said, it's about the steam. It really is about how technologies, whether fantastically motivated or powered by imagination differently than they did in actual history, how does that change our various worlds? So it's really the what if of steampunk and blending those things, but also, you know, coming back to this dynamic time period. The 19th century is when so much of our modern world was born. And for me, being very interested in abolitionists, in Quakers who were, you know, who were both fighting against slavery, but also educating men and women as equals. Suffrage, the movement, as difficult as that was and as fraught as that was, and leaving Black women behind in the suffrage movement, all of that complication. It's a time where there was a dynamic push towards a lot of our now civil rights. We have a lot of the first discussions of the labor movement that would then get into full play in the 20th century. Victoria Woodhull ran for president in 1876 with Frederick Douglass, a Black man, as her running mate. And this is in 1876. And so these things were happening well ahead of the 20th century that were leading us to a much more dynamic and getting towards a more inclusive world with all of its pains along the way. And so for me, that late Victorian era, that late 19th century, that working class, diverse New York City and diverse London and diverse metropolitan areas that I love writing about, that there's so much energy that's happening there towards people from all different backgrounds coming together to save the day. And that's my favorite story to tell.
Perfect. That kind of leads into the next question, which was about dealing with the racial and gender issues that were cropping up at the time. And how about you, Tamsin? Your thoughts? You're muted.
Because I have a dog who's been barking at other dogs, so I keep hitting mute. Sorry about that. In the murder of Cricket Kugler, which is a real girl who was killed when she was 18 in Las Cruces in 1949. This changed the entire dynamic of New Mexico. New Mexico was actually on track to become Las Vegas, Nevada, both, and the mob was here. Chicago Mafia was running a bunch of different towns here. And there was a lot of attention. The FBI had people in Las Cruces paying attention to what was going on. And the civil rights movement became a big thing in New Mexico at that time, specifically regarding her murder. There was a military officer who had been honorably discharged, and he was an African-American man. And they tortured him to get him to admit he killed her, to the point where they attached weights to his testicles and pulled them and tried to get him to say he killed her. And he said, I never touched that girl. And he never felt, in the civil rights, everybody, it became a huge thing. It finally got written up in the paper that this happened. He wasn't going to say anything, but it did. And it blew up. It took this small town and this small case and it blew it. So you had the mafia, and then civil rights, and the FBI came in, and everything became this huge situation. So when working on this book, I have to talk about it. I have to bring this up. We have to discuss it. There are times in the first two books that there is a lot of racism between Texans and New Mexicans that still exists. That was very prevalent in 1878 that I addressed as well. For those of you who don't know, Billy spoke languages. He spoke Gaelic, he spoke Spanish fluently, and English. He was way more educated than a lot of people. And he loved the people of New Mexico very much. And when people would use harsh language against them or the Buffalo Soldiers, and use the N-word or use another derogatory term for Hispanics, he would retaliate. He decks someone in book 2. He just knocks him out. And they're like, he is on our side. He goes, we don't talk that way here. And so because it's prevalent in that time period, I had to make sure that I touched on it. I also had to look at what they called them, because it's now considered offensive. But at the time, the word Negro was used. And so I'm like, how do we use, so there's a lot that we had to look at for sensitivity, but still addressing the situation, because as anyone who knows me or knows my books, I have a platform. I'm very much about equality, anti-racism, LGBTQ. And so I can't not stand up for people in the book, and Billy is an extension of me as the writer in some cases on this. Plus, after researching him, this is how he would have reacted. So I address it, and I have to, and I really have to in this next book, because the FBI comes in and it's a situation. So Wesley, I think it's Wesley Bird's his name. So it was a horrific thing. They took him out in the middle of the desert where she was found, and they tried to force him to say he did this. So it definitely plays into what I've been working on, and I'm sure it will continue to play when I start discussing the different classes of the other world. So that'll also be a thing, because there's going to be a revolution. It's going to be a big thing for that as well. So which I'm getting really excited about, because I'm doing the research and starting to build it. So, but yeah, I have to address it considering the time period I'm writing in. Sorry for the long answer.
No, Jean Marie.
My turn to unmute, sorry. Fortunately, I'm dealing in a secondary world. I have written a historical thing that was not steampunk, set in 1812, and these issues were front and center because of the nature of the characters. But the beauty of a secondary world is you can make it the world you want it to be. And I very much agree with something Mike Williams said, that with every word we write, we are creating the world we want to live in. And so the secondary world that I populate, racism is not an issue. Gender is, or any kind of sexual preference is not an issue. But even taking those off the table, you've still got greed, you've still got the effort to dominate, you still have wrath, you still have pride, you still have all of the deadly sins to play with. So, but yeah, I've got it much easier than the folks who actually have to navigate the real world in their steampunk, because it was pretty damn ghastly.
Nikki, you touched on it a little bit in your last answer, but anything to add?
Well, of course, I've got to be the rebel. Because of steampunk, I decided, like,
Well, there is
instead of
punk in that, so
yeah, oh yeah, so much. I decided I didn't really want to talk about racism, not so much where I wanted to ignore it, but I wanted to flip it on its head. So I made it where we went a little bit extreme, where Anglo men are denied usage of anything that's computer, anything that's tech, anything that's more than a calculator. You have to have all sorts of paperwork. You have to take all these tests. You're always denied. You really cannot go further than, you know, a very distinct spot. And it's not so much saying, okay, then it's suddenly euphoria and it's like this utopia, but it's enough to kind of show, in order to kind of offset this world, make this world into a steampunk ideal, you know, what are some sacrifices that had to be made, but also it's slightly problematic as well, because I have my heroine, she is a bisexual, you know, adventurer, and she has this, you know, biracial, well, she has this white son, and she's raising him, and he's a great kid, but part of the murder mystery that starts is he's framed for a murder he didn't commit, and he's white and he's male. And in this world, it's like, well, we've seen what you all have done. I mean, you know, the wars prior to this, and we see what your people always do. So, you know, he's, you know, possibly going to cause all this strife. So she's trying to obviously solve a murder to clear her son. So it's more of that tie there. And we, you know, we do kind of play around with the race aspect, but more of wanting to read steampunk that had more about the adventure, that had more queer people, that had more of a representation that I could dive into and just have an adventure, instead of it being Black trauma, Black tragedy, It's like, I wanted to still tell stories because we love adventures. We love, you know, diving into people's worlds, but I wanted to tell it from the different perspective of we are more than the trauma. We are more than, you know, the crimes that have been committed against us as just people in general for everyone. So instead it's like, okay, murder mysteries are my favorite because when you write them, justice is always served. The world may be unfair, but at least in the very end of books that you write, at least, you know, the bad guy gets it or some sort of thing. And for my steampunk, what I really love to do is dive into actual history, pull it out, reveal it, and share it, as well as make sure that I used a Rube Goldberg machine to murder one of my characters. And even though the time frame is a little bit off, I was so enamored with a Chinese popcorn machine that, you know, the street vendors use. I was like, I have to figure out a way to kill somebody with a Rube Goldberg machine that's hooked up to this popcorn machine, and there's this gun, and it happens in an airship. But there's a thing about cooking and what I know, you cannot keep an open flame on an airship. You will blow it up. So I had to figure out a full, like, I don't know, I did like 7-course meal, and it had to be where it was not open flamed and it couldn't be stale. So if you read that part of the murder, it's like this whole long, I go into detail about this menu because it took me forever, but it makes sense. And also the food wise, when you reach a certain altitude, and this is just true right now, your taste buds start to dull. And it's also why you end up adding a lot of salt to your food and you end up being swollen when you get off the plane because you can't taste anything. But if you notice, when you have Indian food, when you have spices, Mediterranean type of things, your taste buds can taste all of that and you don't have to add as much salt. So that's, you know, weird, quirky things that I've added to this steampunk world that it's more like random party trivia, but still with a little bit of history tied in, but with fun.
New Mexico is up over a mile where I live, and they put green chili on everything to taste it. So
I'm from California, so yeah. Oh yeah.
All right,
lots
perfect.
of green chili.
Leanna, anything to add to what you said earlier about yours?
Yeah, I think that in my world, I do set my stories in a realistic 19th century in which paranormal things happen. But the fantasy elements are not that there are characters who are working for justice. That's not a modern thing that I'm putting back onto these characters. There were people who were for all of the human rights that we, you know, are continuing to fight for, that have been they were fighting for in the 19th century. So I'm not putting a feminist lens back onto the 19th century that wasn't already there, or a lens and an idea and a fight for civil rights that wasn't already there, a fight for LGBT safe spaces that wasn't already there, for identity, for gender identity. So, you know, I have a trans woman in my Spectral City series. The words and the language are different at that point, but I did not feel that I needed to use harmful language. The characters don't use the harmful words. There's ways to allude to slurs. You don't have to repeat them. You don't have to continue to do the damage again. I don't want for there to be an indulgence in any of the traumas. I'm not interested in that. What I will is allude to the injustices and find ways for the characters to talk about not wanting to be faced with them. And also the characters who do have privilege, being aware of that and stepping in to shield if that is what's necessary. So talking about the different power dynamics, you can talk a lot about what's happening without having to rehash the brutality, while still pointing to the fact that you've got to stick up for people. I've got a heroine who is a detective in a man's world in the NYPD in 1899, and she's facing pushback. So is her ally, a Jewish detective. So they stick up for each other. When one of them is facing discrimination from one angle, they stick up for each other, and it's allyship but in action. And so for me, that's and without ever having to repeat the slurs. But at the same time, acknowledging that they're not living in an equal world. And so creating a space in which I can have my found family that have been brought together by supernatural means, but find a strength in those different spaces. My trans woman is welcome in this space because the spirits lead her there, and she is acknowledged as a female spirit, as a fellow sister of my psychic girl gang of psychic detectives. And the word trans itself is not used in the narrative at all, but I worked with a trans sensitivity reader, a dear friend of mine, Ashley Lauren Rogers, who's brilliant. She's a brilliant activist and a brilliant writer. And so she's worked as a sensitivity reader on a lot of my work in different capacities. And so Antonia as a character, you know, trans folks have always existed. It's just a matter of like, how has the language developed through time, for better or for worse? And also same thing for gay folks and non-binary folks. All people have always existed, and all people have also always, you know, history was not always, was never, ever a monolith of any kind. And so I'm interested in the ways in which the more, the merrier in terms of perspectives, in terms of backgrounds, as long as it's met with respect from my main characters, not by my villains. That's what makes them villains. But in an interesting world where technology was starting to be a bit of an equalizer in certain capacities, where people who had been denied access to power and means suddenly had new ways into jobs. And we see that through history, where new technologies, emergent technologies, we see this happening all kinds of times through history, where marginalized folks can get a leg in to somewhere that there wasn't there before. I mean, the Industrial Revolution allowed for a whole nother class to rise, and for the distribution of resources to be much more broadly spread. So I think that that's a very interesting thing, and I play with that in my worlds as new emergent thought and new emergent technologies as leading to a much more range of voices being heard and finding their way.
Perfect. Larry, your thoughts on?
We took a very similar approach to what Leanna was talking about. I describe it that the backdrop or the tapestry of the world is the US lens of the Victorian era, which is, if you are not familiar, in many ways different than what was in London, because it was a different world. And I know we had one example where with a UK editor having issue with how the servants interacted with the people. Well, it doesn't work the same way in the States as it did in the UK, or even what doors they were allowed to use. There are just a lot of differences. So that Victorian era is the backdrop. But then we have the bubble of the characters who are the active participants in the story. So within the bubble of those players, we tended to go to more modern language and modern values of they are the characters, the individuals, and whether it was race or gender, that was not part of the storyline. What did happen though, and I will use the example of gender, is coincidentally, one of our main characters is Nikki, who is an extremely strong character in the book, very independent and does what she likes, but she still had to act within the world she was living in. And one of the big events was a death that sort of precipitated the storyline, and the death customs and how people had to behave, and the differences for how women had to behave versus how men were allowed to behave. You see a character manage that. It does not stop her. It does not slow her down, but you see how she manages within that tapestry to get what she wants and to get it done. We also did not use a lot of the language of the time intentionally, just to not throw the reader out.
All right, perfect. So my next question jumps into more of the writing of steampunk or any of the punk subgenres. Do you start with the character, the setting? How do you go about starting yours when you're writing? And I'll start with you, Jean Marie.
I should really leave it on mute, but I'm trying to be kind. When I start cackling, you don't want it. But anyway, It usually starts with the stories. You know, I can't say because everything is different. Siren Bridge started as a invitation to an anthology, and the story growed. It just growed, it growed, it growed. A story, a situation, but it has to feel right for you know, the setting. And I've always enjoyed, like I said, I've always enjoyed the sensory input of other periods. And so that, I suppose, is where it starts. This idea that this is a world that has all of these sensory things that are similar, but not quite similar to our own. And to go with that. But right now, basically it's following characters. The subsidiary characters in The Wizard of Woodrow Park, the one that was in that Zombies Need Brain anthology, become the primary characters in The Clockwork Nightingale. One of the people that one of the characters works for in The Clockwork Nightingale is the main love interest in the novellas, which are dealing the series that starts with Siren Bridge and Oleander Jones, a lady who's never any better than she should be. So, you know, right now things are starting with Ollie, but the whole thing, the entirety, started with the feeling, the aesthetic of steampunk, this world where, you know, steam and strange electricities are powering. And how does that change? And if you have magic, how is it integrated into an industrialized society? Because let's face it, people are not going to sit off being wizards if you've got an industrialized society. You're going to turn it into an industry, you know, like basically mass-produced charms to deflect illusion. There's going to be a manufacturer for that. And when you have manufacturers using magic, it snowballs. And so you've got all of those things into playing into it now. Plus the idea of this strange Victorian-ish world that starts falling apart the further you get away from my analogs to continental Europe. You know, you start getting further and further west. Okay, New Jersey, it's kind of recognizable. But when you get out to, say, the equivalent of St. Louis, it's not going to look anything like you expect. And oh, by the way, you know, we did not take over from the tribes. They still have their strongholds, and we're staring at each other, you know, and that's going to be part and parcel of it. And then you got crazy mad scientists who want to keep their wives alive by stitching body parts together. You know, so it just sort of, as you do, yes, as you do. So, you know, it just sort of, it rolls along. It's sort of like asking me where I get my ideas. Hell if I know. And I'm sure if anybody knew, they'd probably shoot the person who gave them to me.
Any suggestions on things for people to read in steampunk, other than, of course, all of your books? Jean Marie, we'll finish up.
Lilith St. Croix has a wonderful steampunk series that I'd have to go to my bookshelf to find it. It's only like 3 or 4 books, and it's been made into an omnibus collection. But it is Victorian London, but she does things to it that are really weird. And then, of course, if you like zombies and apocalypse, you got to look at Sherry Priest. And then there have been some fascinating alternate takeoffs on the Civil War, written by authors of color. Yeah, and I've read them, but I'm bad with titles, as you saw, you know. I know Lilith St. Croix, she's a friend, so I remember her name. Can I remember the name of the book? Yeah.
So Dread Nation by
Dread
Julie
Nation.
Ireland. Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's another one that just came out that looks fabulous. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but there's so much. And then Roshana Chokshi, am I saying that right? Does an alternate vision of Paris that's got magic and steampunk that is really lush. I mean, and it's dealing with the underworld. Getting back to what Leana was talking about, the thieves, the small businessmen, I hesitate to say demi-monde because demi-monde implies more the entertainment arts, but the people who are operating on the fringes of society, and how both the mechanized world and magic affects them. So there's so much out there. It's just wonderful.
So Nikki, how about your writing process with steampunk and some book suggestions if Jean Marie hadn't covered them all?
She stole mine. But for me, food or a character. I didn't realize that was not common, but when I was like Leana, when it comes to history and learning about stuff, I think with the 1800s, no matter where you're writing about, if you look at it from the process of food, things were being invited into different parts of the country, things that people had never tasted, never seen before. And that has a history. Food has history. Food, culture and food and all these different things. So there would be times where I was exploring different types of fruits for the first time, things that I had read about but never really had when I moved to the East Coast. And then it became, well, where did this come to be? And how did this happen? And what was the process? And when did we first have it? What country did it come into? What state did it come into? And it became its own character. And I realized that that's where a lot of my culinary based stories came from, because it was poised in that true history. Also too, with the characters, sometimes people remind me of food and food reminds me of people. So it kind of comes up that way. Or I think to myself, like, there'll be moments where I'm listening to a tune or something will happen where it just kind of, I follow the pattern of how it ties together in my brain. And it becomes this funny type of moment. I mean, with Maison Death, there is this scene I wrote to cheer myself up, and I talk about it often. We've nicknamed it the ring toss scene, and it takes place in a bordello, so you can all figure that one out. And it was like one paragraph long, and it was to get from point A to point B. I needed to, put this red herring in, I needed to put this clue in, and it grew into about almost 2 pages of hilarity, because at the time that, I was so sad. A friend of mine had passed away. I needed something to cheer myself up. And each time I'd write that scene, instead of going the opposite of being morose, I just kept adding to it, to the point where one of my editors was reading it and she's typing and she's telling me, I'm crying. Like, I can't stop laughing. I am crying so hard. My daughter's like, what you reading? Can I read it? No, she's like 12. And it's like, no. So, and for that, it's like food, people, there is that wanting to talk about joy. And so wanting to find people, characters, things like that. And that will either tell me what food to describe, or the food will tell me which character is tied to this, and that sort of way. So for me, that's how I end up coming up with, different characters, or what comes first. It depends.
All right. And any other book recommendations?
I don't have anything off the top of my head. I've been reading a lot of contemporary Japanese murder mysteries right now. So,
Right.
Like you do. So,
Okay.
So sorry, I've been diving into that lately.
No problem. Leana.
So I come from a theater background. I am a trained classical and Shakespearean actress. So my theater background really informs my writing. And I was always writing while I was doing professional theater. And it wasn't really until I got to New York City and I was at a Broadway callback, and all I could think about was my book. the one that became my debut novel, Strange and Beautiful. And so I just stopped auditioning and focused on the thing that was clearly more important to me than the Broadway callback, as I was thinking about my book. So that really kind of like showed me where my truest love was. But I really do, and I'm still involved as a performer. I still do various performative work, and tour a one-woman show about the lady who designed all of Louis Comfort Tiffany stained glass lamps, because it was a lady that did the designing. So so there's fun ways for me in which my theater background directly informs everything that I do. I don't really know where theater stops and my writing begins, other than this is a page, not a stage, but the characters drive everything. So I'm a character-driven novelist through and through. Plot I put in because I have to, but I would really just rather my characters have fun with their friends and just go on and on, an adventure with their found family. I'm such a like get the Scooby Gang together, and everyone has something new to share. The kind of thing that's it sounds a little utopian, but I mean that's kind of where I'm getting to. There's just a lot of there is a body count and lots of technological terrors in the way to get to a wonderful day picnicking in Central Park. But for me, it's really the characters and like, how do I get to love and safety? How do I get to safe refuge with these people that I love, that I want my readers to feel like they're a part of the found family that I've created. So that's a big thing for me, is like trying to generate community in this, in my work. So that's definitely a theme, and it really comes from that character, a cast dynamic, wanting to have my fellow actors, my characters in these books have their adventures. So it's all theatrical, and then somewhere in there I have to craft it. And I'm a pantser definitely through and through, even though I'm always in skirts, but I'm definitely writing by the seat of my skirts. And as I try to just adventure from one thing to the next. So I think I'm also very much drawn to other character-driven narratives as well. And a couple of recommendations that I really love. Nisi Shawl has a book called Everfair that is magnificent, and it's an alternate history, and it's positing what if Africa had gotten technology ahead of colonial invasion. And it's an incredible and a beautiful book. And also Nisi Shawl is just a beautiful person. So really recommend Everfair. And so that's a favorite. And then there's a really fun one called The Brass Queen that just came out by Elizabeth Chatsworth. And Elizabeth is the most delightful, charming, lovely human who happens to also have written a delightful, witty, charming book. And it's just a real fun romp. It's just now out. So check out The Brass Queen. It's just a whole lot of fun. It's just an absolute blast of a book. So check that out.
And she always brings up dog pictures, I've got to say. I love her boo.
And the terrier pictures are really wonderful. So definitely you want to follow her and her adorable dog, which is definitely one of the things that has continued to keep me hooked on what she's up to. So yes, absolutely. She's also a really great audiobook narrator too. So she does it all.
That accent.
Oh, it's so great. It's so great. And also too, if you're looking for ways in which to work on really great narratives in terms of diversity and handling things like sensitivity readers, Nisi Shawl does a course with K. Tempest Bradford called Writing the Other. And I highly recommend their works because as you know, again, we're talking about writing diversely, and writing sensitively is really important too. So Writing the Other, that Nisi Shawl, who wrote Everfair, has co-created this program that you can find online with K. Tempest as well. It's a really great resource. So that is another thing, just with fellow writers, definitely check all of that out, because I've learned so much, and my writing is so much better and richer for having worked with a wide variety of sensitivity readers through the course of my career.
All right, perfect. Larry, how about your process?
Well, and this is more of an hour process, but I would say, well, one, I'm assuming we're starting with a first book because we never do just one. But when you're starting the series, and we typically will start with a kernel of an idea for plot. And then the second piece is the characters and the character development, because that's what builds out the plot. And I know this is sacrilege to say, especially in steampunk, but typically the science, the gadgets, the gears come last after the plot and the characters, because that's sort of the window dressing that we figure in after we figure out, okay, what has to happen? Okay, what can we invent that would make this work? But that's after we know what the character is likely to do, because typically we always have a character who likes to blow things up because, you know, explosions keep the pace, they make the book move along, it's more exciting. I think in Iron and Blood, our goal when we sold it to the publisher was, we will have an explosion in every chapter or someone will die. Something will happen just to keep it moving. But then you have to know what your character is, what their motivation is. Do they like bangs? Do they like flashes? You know, what are they looking for? So certainly the character is the ultimate driver of this story, in how we've done almost all of our different books. As far as what I'd recommend, I have two different series and they're very different. T. Morris and Pitt Ballantyne write The Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences, which is a London-based. It does have some paranormal, some supernatural, and it's just fun. And it's sort of the first thing that I found that got me hooked on the steampunk. And the other one is Clay and Susan Griffith, another writing team. And theirs takes it in a whole different direction. It's called The Vampire Empire. And it's definitely not based in the UK because that's where all the vampires are. Everyone else has moved to the Southern Hemisphere, like Africa. And so the story has a very different feel and take because it is not European based.
All right.
So I would definitely, again, that's The Vampire Empire and The Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences.
All right, perfect. Tamsin, what about your process?
I also have a theater background. I got a degree in theater education. I taught high school, I taught middle school drama, and I ran a theater company in New York City for a while, and with a lot of Shakespeare. So I'm very similar in the way that Leana writes. It's definitely character first for me, which is obvious in the sense that I started with, okay, what's the history of Billy the Kid? Okay, what else? What could be the reason around that? And but history has a lot for me. So a lot of you talked about how you don't really use some of the racial language and you don't use some of the things, and I am. But that's because I'm focusing a lot on history, and I want these books to be, obviously I'm not looking to offend and I'm being careful and we're doing research, but I want them to be also educational in a way because I have a teaching background. So I very much want to use some of it. I don't use much. I do enough to give you the feel of that world. Regarding the magical part of it, I'm very similar to how Gail and Larry do it. I start with history and character, and what situation they're in, where they're located. And a lot of my magical gadgets come from, all right, so I need to be able to do this. So what could I invent to make that work? And that actually, when I was, it wasn't steampunk, but when I was doing Sky of the Damned, which Leana shows up in episode 5, it is, there's this thing called the Blacklight Pill. And the Blacklight Pill is to help vampires go out in the sun. And the whole reason we invented that was because we were filming and I don't have budget to wait for days without sunlight in New York City. Do you know? So, and I wasn't going to do what they did with Twilight, where they had huge things they covered the sky with. And I was like, yeah, we can't do that. So we need to figure out how to make that work. And so we can justify how these vampires can be outside in the daylight so that I'm not also spending tons of money on night shoots. So, I'm the same way when I write. So like they have a witch ball of magic, and I'm not going to try and remember the word of the lamp now. I always have to look it up even when I write it, so I'm not going to try now. But it's a ball of it's a special stone, and they ignite it and it lights up, and it's how they can see in the dark because there's no flashlights, right? So, and I needed that. I also needed a way for Billy to see what's going on, since it's in first person, next door or somewhere. And so that's how another character, one of my shape-shifting characters, was created, and why I needed him. So a lot of my magic comes from, what do we need? What helps move the story? What makes it interesting? How can I get from this point to this point? But I've been doing urban fantasy and creating magic for a while, and I love doing that. So when I get to something and I get to create more, I get really excited. So, but yeah, for me, it's very character-based, but we start with the history. Where are they? What's the historical significance? What's the point I want to get across? What do I want to teach? What I want people to get interested in? Okay. Now these people and their relationships. Friendship is the key. One of the things I loved about Lord of the Rings, and this might seem strange, is that when we got to the end, you all of a sudden go, and I've said this in other interviews, all of a sudden you realize this isn't about a goddamn ring. This is the friendship between Frodo and Sam. And it just hit me so hard. And I was like, that's how I write. Oh my God. And for me, it's these relationships and how they work and how they save the day, really, right? So it's a conglomeration of starting there and moving through. So for me, I'm very similar in that way to everyone else on the list. As far as books I recommend in the area, other than Leana's and everyone else here, I've read mostly of Leana's, so that's. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of Soulless. So if someone's not read this, I highly recommend. This was actually a gift to me from my first editor. And then the other one is a YA series called The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare. Gorgeous covers too, beautiful men. I mean, like two. So I really love her Shadowhunter world, and these actually are my favorite of all of her series. So I recommend those as well. And everybody's hit on a lot of other ones, so I'm not going to sit here and try to think up more. But those are ones I would definitely recommend.
All right, perfect. And before we end, let's go around again and let everyone know where they can find you on the internet. And I'll start with you, Nikki.
All right. Well, you can find me at nikkiwoolfolk.com. Pretty much Nikki Woolfolk author as far as my Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Also, you can find me on Amazon. And when you ask about the chocolates, we changed our company name to Belmont Chocolates, which translates to beautiful world. BelmontChocolates.com, which you can get free recipes. Belmont Chocolates on Etsy for right now, just kind of holding that space. Because we're moving everything over again, since we keep selling out of things, and I need a bigger space in order to hold all my goodies. So, okay, that sounded different. That sounded almost not PG-13, but whatever. Anyway, you know what I mean. So yes, you can find books and chocolates. Follow me on Facebook if you want to hear. I usually don't talk too much about the books, but I usually talk about like the adventures of my teenage autistic son and his all the funny things that he says, the weird conversations I have with my partner, and the strange musings. So yeah.
All right, perfect. Leana.
I am most often on Twitter at Leana Renee. So my first and middle name. And so that's, if you, in terms of social media, obviously leannareneehieber.com. You can find information on each one of my series, and I have several different series. All of them have crossover characters. So if you like the idea of my found family, you can follow their family legacies as they go from one series to the next. You don't have to have read one series to read the other series. The series in and of themselves stand alone, but you'll find familiar friends that show up in the next. So you'll find each one of those has its own page, as well as information about the shows that I do on my website. I'm trying to get better about Instagram. I really like Instagram, and that's Leana Renee Hieber is my my handle on Instagram. I am never on Facebook, so you can try to find me there. I have pages, but I'm just never there. So definitely try me on Twitter and Instagram first and foremost. I am also on Etsy. I have an Etsy shop called Torch and Arrow. So if you like the various things you see here, I try to rescue vintage jewelry and do new things with it. So that's Torch and Arrow. So Etsy shop Torch and Arrow is our handle there. And my Spectral City series, if you just Google the Spectral City, it's available in digital as well as trade paperback. The first trilogy of full novels is complete. And when I do continue on, it will be in novellas from a different character perspective. So if you're one of those completionists, you can go ahead and dive in to the Spectral City, and all three are available. And you can check out my forthcoming work on Scribed at Bryant Street Publishing. My work with Scribed is continuing my Dark Nest novellas. So if you want to hear me do an audiobook, I do all of those space opera, psychic space opera tales. So very different than steampunk, but I'm going to be doing more Spectral City novellas via that platform as well. So trying to kind of make sure that I keep my Spectral City series alive, because it's really, honestly, I gotta say, this is one of my favorite things that I've ever written. So, and look for Dead Ringer coming out from Serial Box in June. And that's a real fun, if actually really funny murder mystery about a telephone operator in 1892 who has a ghost that comes through her telephone console, and she has to solve what happened to the ghost and prevent another murder. And so it's going to be done in audio drama style. So I'm very excited about that. It's called Dead Ringer, and it'll be out from Serial Box in June. So you can check out, they have membership, subscription service, stuff like that. And I'm really excited about that, because it's really where my theater background and writing for something that's going to be done in audio could kind of have to really take the stage. And my amateur detectives, I always wanted to write a disaster heroine who's just falling down all the time. And that's pretty much, it feels a little true to life. And so I'm very excited for that one.
All right, perfect. Larry.
There are a number of ways to get there, but they take you to the same place. If you go to larrynmartin.com, I share a site with Gail, and we have all of our books, whether you want audio, ebooks, whatever platform you want. There are links there to get those, as well as all of our social media links and all the other places you can find us. So again, larrynmartin.com.
All right, perfect. Tamsin.
You can find pretty much everything about me at tamsinsilver.com. That there are links to all the social media. I tend to spend most of my time on Facebook, because I also have a day job with a hospital that takes up a lot of my time. And because I didn't nearly have enough to do, I now sell Pampered Chef. So I also have that site. I'm actually going to be adding, because I'm using my pen name for that because of my website and because of the Facebook. So there will soon be a link on my author page that says, "But I thought you sold Pampered Chef," in case they end up there, and you can click that and it'll take them onward. So I just started doing that. That's a recent endeavor. We'll see how it goes. But you mostly will find me on Facebook. And the third book in the series for the Untold Legends should be out by DragonCon, which is in September. Hopefully it'll come out earlier than that, like in August. And that one will be a little more, it'll be a little different from the first two, because it'll be part murder mystery. Because Billy and Richard are in 1949, and they're researching to figure out who killed Cricket. And then not only are they doing that, but we're tying up the series of them trying to banish the dark leader of the other world back down. So you've got that time period, and then of course we then finally answer the big question: is how is Billy still alive in 1949? And we actually do the death scene in 1881. So we're gonna tie everything up, and it's a little bit of murder mystery, it's a little bit of history, it's a lot of fantasy, and it sets up a couple new characters that I'm looking forward to do one-offs on. One is in New York, Renee. I am so excited to do like old New York. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment. So I'm excited to get involved in those. I'm really looking forward to finally getting this third book off my computer into my publisher, and that should be out to them in April. So I'm excited for that to finally get out to everybody, because it's a really fun story, and I'm super excited for people to read, to get to finish the adventure.
Perfect. And finally, Jean Marie.
Okay, you can find me at jeanmarieward.com or on Facebook at Jean Marie Ward, no spaces, or Jean Marie Ward Writer if you don't like me occasionally getting really salty and political, which I don't do often, but when I do, it's pretty bad. I'm also on Twitter at Jean_Marie_Ward. Yeah, Jean_Marie_Ward. And lots of stuff all over, but all of my books and my stories are on the website. Got a new urban fantasy story coming out in the Zombies Need Brains anthology, The Modern Deity's Guide to Surviving Humanity. Wine is definitely involved. And yeah, got to have that alcohol. There should be a novella coming out from Falstaff Books this year called Blood and Strawberries, which is also urban fantasy set in Washington, D.C. Pre-plague, you know, but recognizably Washington, D.C. And I think that about covers the waterfront for me, but thank you for having us.
Yes, very much. This was cool.
Thank everyone for coming. I think we covered a lot of ground, and there's probably enough for 2 or 3 more panels, I'm sure.
Certainly
So-
our recommendations, if certain people, I will not look in the mirror here, can get the books to their computer in time to show them up.
I was lucky. They're just behind me. I was like, Don, where are you at? I know you're here.
I can't wait to dive into yours, Tamsin. Oh my
yay.
gosh.
Oh, I'm actually looking forward to going to yours. So once we're off this recording, you and I are going to chat.
Oh,
Great.
Mutual
I do-
love affair.
I'm so excited.
I do thank everyone for watching, and see everyone next time. Bye.
Thank you.